Hi everybody, I'm Susan Mulvihill. Are you growing tomatoes? Are you worried they won't be ripe by the end of the season? Well, I've got you covered because I have some tips to help you get as many ripe tomatoes by the end of the growing season as possible. Now, before we get started, I have some really cool news. We actually got a little bit of rain yesterday. Woohoo! It probably wasn't even quite 1/10 of an inch, but hey, we will take it. Now today it is fairly pleasant, but we're going back up into the high 90s and even into the hundreds again, so I'm not very happy about that. But it's a beautiful day today, perfect day for doing this video. The first thing I want to do is give you a bit of background. I live in Spokane, Washington. That's about 300 miles east of Seattle. It's a very dry climate. We get cold winters, and our frost-free growing season is from about the middle of May to roughly the middle to the end of September. So the clock is ticking right now. The other thing I wanted to clarify is ordinarily this time of year, it's the middle of August, you would be seeing tons and tons of tomatoes on the tomato plants. Well, this year, between extremely high temperatures, all the way up to 111 degrees Fahrenheit, and being in an exceptional drought, this has been one of the most challenging growing seasons for me ever, and it has been the same for the poor tomatoes. We have very few tomatoes on our plants, but you are probably not in the same boat. And so I wanted to share with you the beginning of my 3-step process that I go through every year, starting about 6 weeks before our first frost is due. And it is all for the purpose of helping as many tomatoes ripen as possible so you get a great harvest. So again, this is the first step of pruning them over the course of a few weeks. So today I'm going to do the first pruning, and then in about 2 weeks I'll do the second pruning, and I'll do a video on that. But what you want to do is take your plants, look at the tops, and in this case I see a bunch of brand new flowers. There is no way there's enough time in the season to produce tomatoes that are of a size that we could harvest. So sadly, I'm going to have to snip them back. And this one, I'm tracing it back, making sure there's no tomatoes that are a decent size on here so that I don't accidentally prune it off. And so there's a piece that goes off. Here's another one, and here's another. So I'm going to do this all the way around this bed, and then I'll move to the other beds. But again, just trace it down, see how low you can go. I'm going to go maybe to about here. And it's such a shame, you know, here we have all this lovely new growth, we've got new flowers, but they are not going to produce tomatoes by the end of our growing season. Okay, so I have finished pruning these 2 rows of paste tomatoes. If you haven't heard that term before, those are elongated tomatoes that tend to be not super juicy, but very meaty, and so they're ideal for making sauce, ketchup, and salsa. And that's why we love to grow them. So we have a very small amount of them on the plants. I'm hoping you have way more tomatoes than what we have, although I'm envious. But the thing that I wanted to point out is the whole purpose behind this initial pruning and the second pruning is to make the plants focus their energy on developing the existing tomatoes on them, not blooming and not developing some tiny little tomato that is not going to be ripe by the end of the season. So I know it looks kind of drastic, but that's the whole point. I really want them to ripen the tomatoes that we have. In this third bed, I'm growing 3 types of tomatoes. I've got Chef's Choice orange slicing tomatoes in here, which I love, and we actually have some that are just about ripe. Then I have a grape tomato in here called Pandorino, and I also have 3 Costoluto Genovese heirloom tomatoes in here. But the same routine applies to all of these plants. So on these, everything is being a little more productive, and so I'm going to have to be slow and careful making the pruning cuts. Another thing that's nice about doing this pruning is it is exposing the fruits to more sunlight, and I believe that will help them ripen. So that's a side benefit from this project. And another thing that I do throughout the growing season, and especially now, is I trim off branches that are down on the ground. Now I can't cut this one because I've got a bunch of tomatoes on it. But the idea behind pruning these low branches is that increases airflow around the plants, and that's very good for the tomatoes. And of course, when you do this, which you have to do very carefully, you can see how the plants are doing and how the tomatoes are coming along. It's actually kind of refreshing on this bed because there's no blossom end rot and there are a fair amount of tomatoes, so that is cool. The paste tomatoes are very susceptible to blossom end rot, and we do have it this year because of our horrible heat. Okay, I got all of the pruning done, and I really want to emphasize the importance of being very careful before you make your cuts. Always look to make sure you're cutting off a leafy branch and not one that has tomatoes on it. You know that old adage, measure twice, cut once? Well, this is look twice, cut once. It will save yourself a lot of grief. So we'll revisit this in 2 weeks, see how the plants are doing. There's going to be more new growth. We should see more color in the tomatoes next time, and we'll do the second pruning. Thanks so much for watching today, everybody. Happy gardening!